I was talking to the guy on the ferry, and he said something odd.
What was that?
He said bad things happen here.
This town has its secrets, but there's something rotten here.
The only thing that's going to get people killed here is a lack of infrastructure.
Well, that's because the island has lain dormant, but she's waking up. And that's when bad things happen. You think the fog out there is natural? No, it ain't natural. It's a haunt.
I was tricked by a devil and betrayed by my lessers. We couldn't even find vermin to sate our hunger. Some ate the corpses, others gorged on dirt. I was contemplating how to end my own life with my own hand when I saw it. But I was starving, and it was starving too. Covenant was offered for my settlement's salvation, and I signed that pact with my own blood.
What was it you saw?
A demon? The island itself?
You can't let people stay here. That's the end. The end is not right.
I thanked God, but something else came to me. Fulfill the pact, and the flames will stop. If I had refused, none of you would be here.
Maybe that would have been better.
Welcome to Widow's Bay. There's so much to see here.
To preface, I am no writer, just an aspiring one, but when I see some narrative potential, I can't help but have my mind race with ideas. I just really enjoy articulating these narrative potentials through the format of theory crafting. And boy, do I feel like we have some really interesting theories to cover today. Now, when it comes to the series of Widow's Bay, we find many different supernatural things taking place. And in most cases, you can easily attribute some of these supernatural things into what could be considered one-off stories or interludes between the main overarching narrative. Though with the season in Widow's Bay potentially coming to a close very soon, there's not much room to expand on a lot of these interlude stories. Not to say that any of these sort of horror one-offs were bad by any means, and some of them were even my favorite episodes of the entire season, but even if this season 1 ends with everything completely wrapped up, there's still a narrative chance we could expand on these stories if they just leave enough left open for a second season. For example, in a season 2 or 3, you could bring the hag back to find a new victim. You could have another story or two set inside the hotel. And in one of my recent breakdowns, I did discuss the narrative potential for expanding on the Boogeyman story. The story we've seen characters like Patricia be heavily involved in. But the Boogeyman seems defeated. What else could you really do with that story altogether if the show got future seasons? Well, let's take a look at some of the clues. A lot of the victims that we see of the Boogeyman back then during his first massacre shared one common denominator. The Boogeyman, who was a real person and owned a home at some point, somehow knew these victims' numbers and even where they would be most likely to hide. Now sure, you could assume the supernatural energies of the island just helped guide him as if he was a Fear Street maniac, or he could have received help from someone who knew information about all these girls. Someone who knew their numbers or even knew where they would hide in case of emergency. Someone like a close friend. I'm wondering if Chris, potentially influenced by the island or just being a bad person altogether, had not only helped the Boogeyman in his previous massacre, but could also even be preparing a new group of girls to sacrifice for the Boogeyman, only Patricia tends to keep getting in the way. But there's also another reason to believe why Chris could have gotten involved in the first place, and that's if she had some strange connection to the island's history or even its magic. By that I mean, while she could be a descendant of Richard Warren, I think it would make a lot more sense if she was actually related to or actively a part of the island's Coven of Witches. See, during the first episode, we see Jerry reference the witches.
The witch trial, a great source of pride. We caught them, we burned them.
Now, should some of these witches not only have survived, but had kids that continued down the line, kids they potentially even trained in the witchcraft, it would explain some of the paranormal stuff we could have seen so far. Like the evil book that Patricia read that led her to creating a party using what looks like witchcraft. And with this strange book targeting Patricia and appearing in her life, You could even suggest that she could be related to the witches in some way. But then you have to ask the question, was this coven just adding to the misery and paranormal activity of the island, or were they potentially tapping into the island's energies to try to help people? As the book Patricia was particularly using seemed like some source of dark magic rather than magic altogether. This was clued into me by Dana Witch's Brew, who we were on a stream with The Walking Dead Explained, and she did also bring up the idea of potentially two different factions of the coven warring with each other on the island over years. While some could have been attempting to help the islanders from all these strange paranormal threats, some could have followed or gotten influenced by a darker path and got involved with the entity we see Richard Warren make a pact with. Hell, in regards to dangerous witches, you could even just have one who strayed away from the helpful path the coven was taking and was powerful enough to give the rest of the coven a bad name amongst the island, eventually leading to their culling altogether. I just think, given the history of the Salem witch trials and how there were actually a lot of innocent victims of such, combined with the town's pride they had over getting rid of the witches, there's a lot of narrative potential to prove that there was more involved with this coven than what we actually see. But notice how Jerry talks specifically about culling them. It's with pride, whether that be because she just drank from the town Kool-Aid and believes whatever she reads, or because Jerry herself is high on the suspect list already. Every part of me doesn't trust her, or at least thinks she has more than she's letting on. And I think it would be really cool to, rather than see another entire group of evil witches to add to the paranormal activity, instead we had a coven of good witches trying to help, and a faction of the island trying to take up the mantle of witch hunters. And with the powerful paranormal magic of the island, this would only validate the idea that the coven was actually trying to help and were mostly good. Heck, maybe the term witches or coven altogether was placed on them by the town, but in reality, they were just tapping into the same supernatural energies that were affecting the rest of the island altogether. And folk of the time just associated the two. Some people potentially having a natural affinity for connecting to these paranormal activities or energies. And I think it makes perfect sense for one of these people to be Patricia. I mean, the book chose her, she held it in fire and didn't burn. She also broke free of the spell relatively simply, and she's definitely been suffering some of the island's strange effects given that she's biologically only 28 but appears to folk like Tom as 40. But if Patricia, or even potentially Chris, is related to the coven, then we have to start to ask ourselves, who else in the show so far could potentially be connected to the coven or the witch history of the island altogether? You could eventually explore more with Tom's wife and figure out that she has a strong connection to the coven. There's also a chance it's a character that's still around like Kathy, who does happen to brew up some real mischievous dishes. But she also walked straight into the fog and came out fine. But another suspect we can add to the list would be Ruth Livingston. Ruth, not having any children or descendants and seldom appearing on the show, turns out to be the final descendant of the bloodline of Richard Warren. And considering the long timeline and history of Widow's Bay, of which I'll be making a separate video for here very soon, subscribe so you're around when that drops, but there is also a chance she was involved with the Coven in some way. We don't really have any context clues within her appearances in the show so far, but we did get some shots alluding to her connection with Richard Warren. Another suspect could be the shaman, being a warlock, practicing witchcraft to gain the insight he has, although he doesn't really seem too insightful. And we also have Rosemary, who seems to have the same amount of knowledge regarding Widow's Bay history, at least as much as Wick, yet doesn't decide to help out as much as she could.
Oh, Kenny.
Everybody stay back.
Oh, fuck.
I said to stay back. He might have broke something.
Don't let him help me.
Honestly, doing the opposite of helping in most cases. She's definitely the only other person we've seen in full belief of the island's superstitions as much as characters like Wick. Speaking of Wick, I did see an awesome comment adding to this theory claiming that Wick could potentially be short for Wiccan, which Dana had informed me was basically like a group of people who could be considered witches but choose to follow a line of morality and be more of the earth and trying to help and allow people with spiritual freedom or leniency. Could this potentially mean that Wick was either raised by or trained by another Wiccan or witch? As we do see him constantly being observant, alert, and pushing to protect the island and its residents. Maybe after what happened with Jerry's brother and the Kraken taking him away, Wick wanted to make up for his death by joining or reading about how he could protect the island, and this eventually could have led to him associating himself with the Coven. And sure, they could have all been cold by this point, but we're going with the potential that some of them are still lingering around and maybe just in hiding. Now, to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, most of these plot lines I'm describing would have to take place in future seasons, as you don't really have time to expand on that sort of narrative with these final 2 episodes. Still, there is just so much narrative potential and even what could be considered one-offs within this season that you could definitely expand on, especially involving that of the Coven, which we haven't really touched too much on so far. And while I could theorize about this show all day, the only question I have for you guys is one that's sort of been on the back of my mind. Unrelated to some of the storylines or narrative potentials I've discussed so far, but in regards to the character of Dale, do any of you guys think there's some strange connection between all of this foresight and true sight and having your eyes closed or open, and its potential relation to Dale as a character, as out of everyone we've seen so far, he's the only one we've seen with empty eye sockets? Sure, this could just be contributed to Tom losing his mind a little bit on mushrooms, but Tom himself, while tripping out, wrote something about people closing their eyes, and we even see on Reverend Bryce's desk about how his eyes were scratched open, presumably after he himself tried the same mushrooms known as true sight. I don't know, we haven't really seen any character that we could associate with all this seeing and shut and open eyes motif outside the character of Dale, who still has yet to be expanded upon too much. Either way, like I said, there's a very solid narrative chance that this series could end and everything could be resolved by the final episode. But if the show does get a future season, which seriously it should, the writers have cleverly left themselves so many open doors to expand on all these little stories they've been telling and not leave them feeling like filler episodes in the grand scheme of the narrative. And again, filler episodes has a bad taste to it, but every show kind of needs filler episodes here and there, or interlude episodes as some would call. But what do you guys think? Do you want to see more seasons of the show? Do you want to see some expansions on some of these mysteries like the Coven and maybe not so much on mysteries like the Hag? Or would you rather just new mysteries altogether? Either way, I really appreciate the feedback and support you guys have shown on this channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. It's really helped my Widow's Bay coverage get out there, so thank you guys so much. I really hope everyone's been enjoying the show as much as I have, but I'm also really hoping they do decide to push forward with the series altogether. Either way, thank you for your feedback, stay safe out there, and try not to sell your friends out to the boogeyman.
Welcome to Widow's Bay. There's so much to see here. Come with me. I'll show you around. There is something about these seafaring towns of superstitions. They're